Hi again everybody, back here with some more book recommendations. Like I said, reading is one of my passions and I grew up reading a lot of books. Having a mom as a librarian really influenced me and helped me become a book lover. So I'm hoping that by recommending all these great books to you, I can help you become the same. Also, don't forget that some of the middle school and the high school books are interchangeable as well. Personally, as a middle schooler, I read a lot of high school aged books, so I feel that the two are kind of interchangeable, and I know the middle school and high school here at our schools have a lot of the same books because kids are interested in a lot of the same topics. So without further ado, here are my book recommendations for high school aged readers. Alrighty, so to start off for our high school aged books, the first book I have for you today is To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. If you didn't know, this book was recently just turned into a Netflix movie. They actually have the first two books now turned into movies on Netflix, and they're super great and they're really consistent with the book. So if you don't know what To All the Boys I've Loved Before is about, it's basically about this girl named Laura Jean. Basically, Laura Jean writes these love letters to every boy she's ever loved, which are 5 in total, and she hides them away into a box under her bed. One day, her sister Kitty gets a hold of the letters that were under her bed. Songs about To All the Boys she wrote these letters to. They were never actually meant for them to read. It was kind of just a way to write out her feelings and put them away into a box. But from there, it's kind of a fun story. As soon as all the boys get the letters, her love life kind of goes from imaginary to out of control in the snap of a finger. So if you've never heard of these books, they're super fun, kind of contemporary, romance-ish, realistic fiction. Super fun read that I think a lot of girls specifically would really enjoy. I really enjoyed reading it personally when I was in high school, so I really recommend this book. Next up we have Marked, which is the first book in the House of Night series by PC Cast and Kristen Cast. If you're interested in kind of the more Twilight books and vampires, this is definitely a book for you. It's a really interesting story. So we have our main character, Zoe Redbird, who's a 16-year-old in high school. It's a world very similar to our own, except that vampires exist. Like, everybody knows that vampires are real. So Zoe's going to school one day and is just walking down the hallways when all of a sudden this man shows up and kind of marks her with a mark on her forehead. It's a moon, as you can see by the title of the book. They kind of have this little moon on their forehead that marks them as a vampire. And all these vampires kind of get sent away to the school called the House of Night, where they go to school like normal and kind of learn how to control their crazy powers that they have. It's a really cool series. There's lots and lots of books in the series. I can't even keep track anymore. I'm trying to catch up with reading them. But I read them in high school and I really enjoyed them. They're really fun reads that kind of just follow all the drama that goes on in high school, along with having crazy vampire powers. But I really suggest these books. They're a really fun read if you're into vampires and things like that. Alright, next up we have The Selection by Kiera Cass. Basically, I would describe this book as a mixture between The Hunger Games and The Bachelor, if you watched that. So the story is kind of about, it says there's 35 girls, the selection is the chance of a lifetime. So the story goes that once the prince becomes of age, the palace selects 35 girls from the kingdom to kind of win over the king's heart, very similar to The Bachelor. It follows the story of America Singer, our main character, who gets chosen for the selection to kind of win over the prince's heart, but she's already in love with another boy whose name is Aspen, so it's kind of a nightmare for her. But it's really funny. It's like eerily similar to The Bachelor. I'm sure that's what their inspiration was. But it's really fun. Has the kings, queens, prince, princesses, all that kind of royalty. But once America meets the prince, her feelings kind of gradually begin to change. It's a really interesting book that I really recommend. I really enjoyed reading this series in high school. So if you're a fan of The Hunger Games and The Bachelor combined, read this book. Next up we have The Mist by Stephen King. Kind of a thriller, scary book if you're into those. Stephen King is definitely the author for you. So the storyline is there's a huge thunderstorm that's super destructive in the small town in Maine. So basically the storm creates this super impenetrable and destructible mist that kind of surrounds the whole entire city. And this man and his son get stuck in this local supermarket with a bunch of these other people and that are survivors, and pretty much they kind of like lose their sanity and people start turning on each other and going out to the mist that destroys people, and there's some really scary stuff out in the mist. It's a really interesting read that is also turned into a movie if you're interested in watching it. But anyways, if you like thrillers and scary stuff, this one's for you. Alright, speaking of thrillers and kind of like creepy books, The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin is another super great book. My sister and I were super into these books in high school and just ate up the 3 books. Like, they're so good. Basically, this book is kind of hard to explain, but pretty much it's about this girl named Mara Dyer who wakes up in the hospital one day with no recollection or memory of how she got there. But in the hospital, everybody's telling her that she was in an accident in this building that killed her friends and kind of left her mysteriously unharmed. But after the accident, her and her family move away to a new city to kind of escape the whole situation because they're kind of the talk of the whole town and people are accusing them of things. But she moves to a new town. It's kind of a romance-ish, but also really creepy. But anyway, she starts kind of having like weird visions and kind of has weird powers and stuff like that. But that's all I'm going to tell you. It's super, super, super good book. So I highly recommend this if you're into thrillers and creepy things. Alright, next up we have another fiction book. The first book in this series is called Infinity of the Chronicles of Nick series by Sherilyn Kenyon. So our story is about a 14-year-old boy named Nick who is walking kind of out in the streets one night and is attacked, only to be saved by a mysterious warrior who's got crazy fighting skills. From then on, he's sucked into a world of vampire slayers who risk everything to save humanity. And then Nick quickly learns that everything is not what it seems, and that the human world is only a veil covering a much larger, more dangerous world where the captain of his football team is a werewolf, and the girl he has a crush on goes on at night to stake the undead. And before Nick can even learn the ropes of this new world or what's going on, his fellow classmates start turning into flesh-eating zombies. So read Infinity, the first book in the Chronicles of Nick series, to find out what happens next. Super interesting books. I know a lot of my friends were super interested in these books in high school. I never read them, but I know they're really popular books at the library. So if you're interested in fiction books, I think this is a really great one to pick up. Alrighty, next we have The Blind Side by Michael Lewis. So this book, as you probably know, is now a super popular movie. If you haven't seen The Blind Side, it's basically about this boy named Michael who grew up as one of 13 kids of a mother who's addicted to drugs. He doesn't even know his real name, his father, his birthday, how to write anything. He's really struggling, not only in school but in life in general, just because of his family situation, until a family kind of takes him in and teaches them how to play football, gives them love, shows them what a family is really supposed to be like. So a super, super great book. If you haven't seen the movie, I would recommend reading the book first, because the books are always better than the movie anyways. Alright, next up we have March by John Lewis. This is a graphic novel, so if you're interested in those, it's a really cool book to read. This book's about kind of the civil rights movement. It's book 1. I think there's a few other books, but this book's by Congressman John Lewis, who actually just passed away. But he did a lot of really great work in the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King Jr. So if you're interested in graphic novels, historical books, civil rights books, or just really cool books in general, I'd really recommend reading March. Super cool book. Alright, next up we have the book Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, who is the popular host of The Daily Show. It's a biography by Trevor Noah, just kind of about his life of his mother and him fleeing from South Africa, from a country where it was legal for him to be born that was punishable by 5 years in prison. Really interesting to hear his struggles of him growing up. Really popular book right now, so I really suggest going and grabbing it. Alrighty, next up we have some autobiographies. The first book we have is American Sniper by Navy SEAL Chris Kyle. So this is a really interesting story of Chris Kyle, U.S. Navy SEAL, story of being in Iraq as a sniper shooter, kind of just following his experiences in the battlefield. Really interesting read if you're interested in war memoirs. Really popular book, was turned into a movie, or I highly suggest it if you're really interested in war, history and things like that. So biographies and autobiographies are a really great way, as I said in the video before, to get into reading about topics you're interested in. So next up we have an autobiography of Aerosmith. If you're interested in reading about bands and things like that, we have this book about the awesome classic 80s band Aerosmith. Kind of just talking about the band's experiences on tour, how they became a band, all that crazy stuff. Really fun read if you're interested in Aerosmith or other 80s bands or just music and bands in general. I highly suggest this book. Alright, next up we have Vietnam, Book 1, I Pledge of Allegiance by Chris Lynch. This is a historical fiction book if you're interested in those, about 4 friends that are fighting in the Vietnam War, and each in different branches of the military. If you're into historical fiction and war and things like that, I would suggest picking up these books to read.